Tonight, I want to talk about a story that looks like a tech drama on the surface, but when you zoom out, it might turn out to be one of the most important stories about artificial intelligence so far. It involves Silicon Valley, the Pentagon, some of the most powerful AI voices and companies in the world. And underneath it all is a very uncomfortable question. Who actually gets to decide the rules when a technology becomes essential to both commerce and war? Not just theoretically essential, operationally essential. Because that's where we are with artificial intelligence. And the dispute between Anthropic and the United States Department of War may be the first real public stress test of what happens when those two worlds collide. Let's start with what actually happened. According to reporting from the New York Times, Anthropic, the company behind Claude AI, recently began working with the US government in classified environments through partnerships with defense contractors and data analysis firms like Palantir, most famously. But the relationship hit a breaking point. During negotiations over how the Pentagon could use technology, the Department of War wanted language allowing AI systems to be used for, quote, all lawful purposes. Anthropic pushed back. The company reportedly wanted explicit contractual demands on two things: mass domestic surveillance and fully autonomous weapon systems. Now, when you sell a missile to the Defense Department or the War Department, I don't know if you really get to put on preconditions, but I'll leave it up to you guys to determine whether this is an equivalent case. Anthropic argued those guardrails were necessary because advanced AI systems remain imperfect, as I'm sure we all know, could potentially be abused at a massive scale. When you put life or death situations, especially not with just one person, but an entire populace into the AI's hands, that mistake that we know AI is prone to could be magnified. But negotiations deteriorated between the War Department and Anthropic. At one point, according to reporting cited in the dispute, the Pentagon officials considered labeling, and did, Anthropic a supply chain risk. And that kind of designation effectively locks a company out of government systems by rule and probably law. Meanwhile, another major player moved in. OpenAI signed its own agreement with the Pentagon. Suddenly, what looked like a technical disagreement became something much bigger. A confrontation between AI companies, national security institutions, and competing visions of how this technology should be used. I say this according to the New York Times reporting on Anthropic directly. I'll include the link below. Stepping back though, because if you're watching this through the lens of what I preach here, nuance, independence, free thinking, and not listening to the ideologues on either side, the goal isn't to pick a tribe. The goal is to understand the incentives. And then when you look at the incentives on each side of this dispute, the story becomes a lot more interesting. The Pentagon had a aha or a whoa moment. Let's start with the Pentagon's perspective. According to reporting from Fortune, a senior defense official described what he called a whoa moment. That moment happened when defense leaders realized just how much certain classified information and operations were relying on Anthropic's AI systems. Think about that. One private company, a few hundred engineers, potentially becoming critical infrastructure for intelligence analysis or operational planning. For military planners, that's terrifying. Dependency creates vulnerability. In business, we know the scariest number is one for this reason. The US military spent decades designing systems to avoid that single point of failure. Multiple satellites, redundant communication systems, backup command structures. Artificial intelligence is just different. The most powerful AI models today are controlled by a small number of private companies: Anthropic, OpenAI, Google DeepMind, and a few others. The Pentagon suddenly realized something. What happens if just one of those companies decides it doesn't like how its technology is being used? What happens if the guardrails built into those models refuse a request in the middle of a crisis? From the Pentagon's perspective, that's not even an ethics debate. That's a strategic risk. AI is quietly transforming the defense industrial base for decades on the backbone of American military technology. Came from companies just like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, Boeing. Those companies built physical systems, aircraft, missiles, radar platforms, but the technology shaping the future of warfare are increasingly being built by software companies. And many of those companies have cultures very different from traditional defense contractors. In fact, parts of Silicon Valley have historically been skeptical of military work. In 2018, Google's employees protested the company's involvement in Project Maven, a Pentagon program that employed AI to analyze drone footage. Google eventually withdrew from the program after the internal backlash. So that Silicon Valley politics does find its way into, I guess, our military defense. So the Pentagon now faces a strange reality. Some of the most strategically important technologies of the 21st century are being developed by companies that do not necessarily see themselves as part of the defense industry. That creates tension. Meanwhile, AI is already changing warfare. And here's the part that makes this story more than theoretical. AI is already being used in modern warfare. According to the reporting from the Wall Street Journal, AI systems are helping accelerate parts of the military decision cycle in conflicts involving Iran and other regions. These systems process enormous streams of data: satellite imagery, communications intercepts, surveillance feed. AI can analyze those inputs far faster than human analysts. Military planners call this compressing the kill chain. The time between identifying a target and acting on it becomes shorter. Less time for deliberation, calculation, and moral agency. And that can change the tempo of warfare. Faster decision cycles also raise risks. Less time for human review, more analysis, which is exactly why debates over AI in military systems have become so intense. Let's look at it from one side. Anthropic. Now, because their arguments aren't trivial, the company reported wanting explicit restrictions on two areas. Let's go into the first: mass surveillance. Artificial intelligence dramatically increases the scale at which surveillance systems could operate. Algorithms can analyze massive data sets. Facial recognition can scan crowds in real time. Pattern recognition systems can monitor communication networks, potentially the content within the communication networks. Those capabilities can be used for legitimate security purposes, but they can also be abused. And historically powerful surveillance technologies rarely remained confined to their original use cases. Second point of Anthropic's argument: autonomous weapons. Many AI researchers argue that current AI systems are still unreliable. My experience of them is, I know how to use them in weaponry. Large language models and machine learning systems can hallucinate, misinterpret data, or behave unpredictably in unfamiliar contexts, which raises another uncomfortable question. Should machines ever be allowed to independently decide who lives and who dies? That debate is happening globally. The UN, for whatever you may think of it, has held discussions on potential restrictions on lethal autonomous weapons. But there's no binding international agreement. If they ever get to one, I don't think they'll ever enforce it either. Now is the governance problem. Here's the real story. It's not a tech drama and it's not corporate rivalry. It's governance failure. Artificial intelligence is rapidly becoming foundational infrastructure for everything happening in this world. Infrastructure for business, government, national security. Yet the rules governing this technology remain extremely unclear. Congress has not defined comprehensive AI regulations. International agreements barely exist. And instead, we're just watching ethical boundaries getting negotiated through contracts between corporations, government agencies, and whatever other parties may exist to these agreements. That's not how technologies with this level of strategic importance should be governed. Look at the incentive problem. There's another dynamic that deserves attention: competition. AI is one of the most competitive technology sectors in the world. Companies are racing for talent, investment, market share, geopolitical influence. Just look at the headlines that surrounded those four companies when it came to AI's operation, be it hiring or restructuring of HR. Anything that happens is highly, highly volatile. When governments signal that billions of dollars in defense contracts are available, that creates enormous incentives. If one company refuses a deal, another might take it. The dynamic is exactly what some analysts can warn lead to a race to the bottom, especially when it comes to safety standards. I read an editorial from The Economist. They argued that Anthropic illustrates this danger in whatever they just went through. If governments reward companies that move fastest and punish those that they simply don't agree with, their ethical concerns, that's the market incentives way of pushing an industry toward fewer constraints. Not because anyone intends harm, but because incentives shape behavior. And the debate isn't happening in isolation. Artificial intelligence is increasingly viewed as strategic technology by governments around the world. China invested heavily in AI development. Other countries doing the same, as I think they should. AI is truly the future arms race, or the present arms race. This creates just a classic geopolitical dilemma that the schematics of which we've seen before. If one country slows down the development for safety reasons, another country could accelerate. The strategic balance could shift, and the fear drives a lot of urgency in Washington. Here's the civilian dimension. There's another layer to the story that people often overlook: The same AI systems used by governments are also used by civilians, students, businesses, developers, content creators. The model someone uses to write or code or generate text might be based on the same underlying architecture used for intelligence analysis or military planning. Artificial intelligence is dual-use technology. The civilian and military ecosystems overlap. That makes drawing a clear ethical boundary extremely difficult. Who is right? Here's where I stand. The Pentagon is right about one thing. Critical national security infrastructure cannot depend on the moral preferences of a single company. That would be strategically irresponsible. But Anthropic is also right about something, what they put in quotes as lawful use is not always enough when the law has not caught up to technological capabilities. Artificial intelligence can amplify surveillance, accelerate warfare, potentially enable autonomous decision-making systems with life and death consequences. Again, not on a single scale, but on a population scale. Those risks deserve serious discussion. And I wouldn't fault Anthropic for the stalemate in Congress where people just choose to argue and yell at each other instead of maybe legislate for a living. So the real question isn't whether Anthropic was right or the Pentagon was right. The real question is who sets the rules for AI when it becomes foundational infrastructure for both economic productivity and national security. Right now, the answer appears to be nobody. The rules are being improvised, negotiated through contracts, shaped by corporate competition, influenced by geopolitical pressure. That's not a stable system. The Anthropic Pentagon dispute may look like a niche technology story, but historically, moments like this often turn out to be turning points. Early debates over nuclear weapons, the early debates over the internet, surveillance. Those arguments eventually produced new institutions and rules. Artificial intelligence is approaching a similar moment. The question is whether we establish those rules before the technology becomes impossible to control or after. And history suggests we usually wait till after. I hope you enjoyed this video. I go live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday right here on this channel. Please go ahead, sign up for my newsletter where you'll get the links straight to your inbox, chakkalo.com, chakkalo.com. Thank you. See you next time.
Let's unpack the thought, see the other side with open eyes, analyze the world around us. This is Chakkalo, where clarity is found. The conversation doesn't end here. Continue the dialogue.